to direct projects for the International Consortium of Investigative Journalists. Today, he's the Managing Director of Calabar Africa, a strategic consulting company specializing in political analysis, investment support, and media affairs in Africa. Mr. Van Niekerk will speak on Nelson Mandela, the strategist, the politician, and the leader, with a segue into some brief remarks about current leadership issues in South Africa. Philip, thank you for joining us tonight. I know you have a busy travel schedule, but the gods were good. Your presence in Washington coincided with tonight. We're very grateful.
Thank you. I was very struck in the video of Mr. Mandela's performance when he came and spoke at the press club here, his remarks about his support for a free press. And I just want to say that as a working journalist in South Africa, in the years, I guess, 1990, from the moment that he was released until 1999, when he exited after his first, he took one term and he decided, that's it, I'm going to show an example to the future, that we don't hang around until people want us to go. We leave when people still want us to stay. That my experience, in a very direct way, was that he was extremely supportive of a free press as a politician. On a personal level, in 1992, I was wounded in the townships. I was in hospital. I woke up the next morning. There was Nelson Mandela come to say, you know, we don't support the kind of behavior. We're going to talk to people and, you know, basically prevent this kind of action against journalists which we don't support. A couple of years later in Liberia, I got trapped in Monrovia in the middle of civil war. Mandela took time to help get me airlifted out. I wrote a letter to him after that, promising to stay out of trouble. But I tell you, when I was editor of the Mail and Guardian during the first term, during Mandela's first term. We wrote a lot of stuff that the ANC didn't particularly like. As the ambassador might recall. And we were publicly, I remember one Friday morning, there were some, you know, press statements that were fairly critical about the story that had appeared that morning, and telephone rang and there was Mandela to say, we support what you're doing. You know, I back you entirely. And that's the, you know, just want to give that kind of perspective in a very direct way. I also want to say that, you know, we've I guess, heard a lot today about the kind of greatness and the generosity of spirit of Mandela, and the sense in which he, I guess, if we think about him and what he means to us, more than anything else, is his ability to forgive. But having seen him very close at hand, I think one of the most, I think his real political genius was as a political strategist. I think it's an ability and understanding of power and how important power is, because when he was put in that little cell, tiny little cell in Robben Island, he was completely powerless. He had nothing. It was a very important moment in the history of the country. 1963, the real legitimate leadership of black South Africa was either in jail or in exile, and the kind of grand apartheid project was underway to create puppet leadership to run kind of fake countries called Bantustans, which the project being ultimately to dispossess black South Africans of their birthright as South African citizens. Therefore, it wasn't just that he was jailed because he was an opponent. He was jailed because it was necessary to get him out the way, marginalize him completely. So here's this guy, sits in his cell, they're doing hard labor. It was tough out there on Robben Island. It wasn't like anybody was having a holiday or a spa time. It was, you know, anybody who's read the stories about what those guys went through, it was horrendous. And Mandela sits there and he says, right, how do I start to get back? How do I start to kind of reclaim a little bit of power? So they have hunger strikes. They have cities, they have demonstrations. And little by little, they win the right to get newspapers, to have visitations by relatives once a month, to see their lawyers. Every little inch of space that they win is a little bit more power. And even to the point where The National Party realizes, hey, we don't want Mandela to die in jail. We want to get him out of jail. We want to get rid of this problem that he's sitting there. But he understands that. He understands, I have a weapon. You don't know what to do with me. You've got to figure out what you're going to do with me. So they say, all right, you can go. You can go to the Transkei. His cousin, Kaiser Matanzima, was the head of the Bantustan Transkei. Said, you can get your freedom. You can go live in the Transkei. He says, I'm not going to do it. It's all right. If you renounce the armed struggle, if you renounce the ANC, I'm not going to do it. When Mandela walked free in February 1990, he walked out on his own terms. He'd switched the whole power thing around. They were begging him to come out. They were begging him. Believe me, that's not a small thing, because he then undertakes to negotiate the future of the country. There was nothing actually certain about how they was going to end up. They still had some plans that they were going to have, white representation, and they were going to have shared government. There was something like the Lancaster House Agreement in Zimbabwe. Mandela was a tough negotiator. We think of him, as a man who forgives people and who reconciles. I mean, I saw him take on F.W. de Klerk. I saw him blow up, anger, and chastise him like he was a little boy. And de Klerk his ears went red. He was the president of the country. And Mandela had turned the table so completely that even before he actually became president, he was the man that people looked to provide the guidance and to provide the political leadership in the country. When Chris Hani was assassinated in 1993, I think it was the moment that South Africa came the closest to a revolution. There was such anger. The people of South Africa were ready to rise up and just burn and attack because they were felt so kind of betrayed by this assassination. And it was Mandela, not de Klerk, not anybody in the National Party had so lost any ability to sort of speak to the people of South Africa. It was Mandela that appeared on television. And he said, you've got to remember, it was a white woman who spotted the assassins and allowed them to be arrested. We have to calm down. Let's not destroy our future now by exploding in anger. We know, I understand what you feel. And by speaking to people in that way, he showed the most incredible leadership. And actually, it was in Mandela, the palm of Mandela's hands, that we actually steered that country. Because there was, at that time, also terrible third force violence going on. Attacks on people in trains. The Boipatong squatter camp was attacked. Women and children massacred. And there was a lot of anger. And Mandela just kept his eye on the ball. I think it was very good that you showed the extracts from Invictus, because I think Invictus is a good film because it does, in fact, speak to Mandela's political genius. And it wasn't that, in a cynical kind of way, I'm going to use sport. He actually loved sport. He was a boxer himself. Charlene's book, in fact, has got a cover of him with Muhammad Ali. I mean, that was, for Mandela, that was a big moment, meeting with Muhammad Ali. I mean, I'm sure it was a big moment for Muhammad Ali as well. But he genuinely loved sport. He genuinely loved people. I mean, he had that skill which probably Bill Clinton has. That sort of, it's not just that you're schmoozing as a politician, it's that you genuinely are interested. You have that charm and that sense of kind of reaching out. And I saw it, in so many ways, that he changed people who you would have imagined would have hated. Were brought up to hate black people. And then there was Mandela. There was a guy who came once to put a carpet in our house. And we had a picture of Mandela on the wall. He said, that man, this is an Afrikaner, a blue-collar Afrikaner guy who you would have expected, would have hated Mandela. And I said, he said, that chap, we were fixing carpets once at the Elizabeth Hotel, which is opposite the Shell House, where the ANC headquarters were. And all these ANC bigwigs came walking up the stairs and past us, and suddenly there was a tap on my shoulder. And there's Nelson Mandela saying, well, how's the carpet business? And that stayed with that man for the rest of his life. He was just converted by that moment. That ability to reach out to people is the thing. And it's not a cynical thing. And Mandela was there for 5 years. He understood that his role was simply to lead the country, to reconcile. His project was to create a unified South Africa, a miracle, rainbow nation, or whatever. Thabo Mbeki was his prime minister. Thabo Mbeki left the sort of economy and the sort of boring stuff, day-to-day running of the country. And then, as the biggest kind of gesture, he exited after 5 years to say, there's term limits on this whole thing. Now, a lot of people, if we read about South Africa in the newspapers today, we say, what has happened to the Mandela legacy? What has happened to this rainbow nation? There's The Economist running cover stories saying the sad decline in South Africa. There's the Marikana slaughter people are seeing on television, black people strikers being gunned down by the police. Is this no different to what happened before 1994? And a lot of people are asking questions about, well, where's South Africa going? This great leadership kind of example was set at the very beginning, but where are we now? I just want to make just a few very brief comments about that. I think, first of all, it was always going to be hard to fill Mandela's shoes. And I think as much as Thabo Mbeki, I think, was very good for the economy, I think that South Africa was entered a much more divisive phase in that period. Even the ANC to this day is sort of riven by factions, which I think are the legacy in many ways of the Mbeki era. Also, I think that there was a failure to a certain extent to understand that leadership isn't only about what you do now. And there was a lot of great leaders in the ANC in 1994. It's how we prepare for the future. And if anything, I think South Africa, after 1994, failed to grasp the nettle of education and changing the education system and political leadership. The ANC was very good at political leadership before 1994. I think afterwards, if you look at it now, if you still look at those who are contending, there's an ANC conference next month, you still look at those who are contending, they're all pre-94 people. Where's the next generation of leaders? Where's the next generation of Mandelas or Ramaphosa's? And I don't see enough of them coming on. But I think, finally, it's a crisis of expectations. And maybe, I won't say it's Mandela's fault, maybe it's because we as South Africans performed what was really, there's no other way to describe it, but it's miraculous. There's the Palestinians and the Israelis still duking it out. Go to any other, the FARC and the Basques are still haven't settled. South Africa, actually, is an extremely normal society. South Africa might have issues, it might have problems, it might have challenges. But there's a feeling that, because it's South Africa, it's always got to work.